one is just a busted flush, mad American broadcaster, but the other is the president's special envoy. And he knows nothing about what he's talking about. I mean, this guy's a property billionaire. He's never been involved in this level of geopolitics. He doesn't know anything about it.
Let's talk about Ukraine and where we are with the Trump administration, because Steve Witkoff, the man whom Donald Trump has given the job of bringing peace to the Middle East, and if he's got a moment or two to spare from that, he might have a go at Ukraine as well. He's been interviewed and he's criticised Keir Starmer's plans to send troops there. Witkoff has been talking to the podcaster now, Tucker Carlson. The exchange is very, very striking. It probably reveals something about the American mentality, or at least the American administration's mentality. Let's hear. This is Witkoff talking to Tucker Carlson. It starts with Carlson.
What the hell is going on with European League? Keir Starmer saying we're going to send British troops. Their entire military is smaller than the U.S. Marine Corps. The country is dying economically. All those countries are dying economically. Like, what are they thinking? What is that? Is that a posture? Is it a pose?
Well, I think it's a combination of a posture and a pose, and a combination of also being simplistic. I think there's this, this sort of notion of we've all got to be like Winston Churchill. The Russians are going to march across Europe. I think that's preposterous, by the way. We have something called NATO that we did not have in World War II.
Do you think the Russians want to march across Europe?
100% not. I think.
Right. I mean, like, why would they want that? I wouldn't want those countries. Like, why would they?
But why would they want to absorb Ukraine? For what purpose?
Exactly.
They don't need to absorb Ukraine.
Andrew, I don't know what you make of that. To me, that sounds like a podcast of the mentally challenged, reassuring one another. But this guy's a very important, very, very, very important figure in the administration, Witkoff.
It's what happens when you have two idiots beside a microphone and neither of them knows what they're talking about. I mean, one is just a busted flush, mad American broadcaster, but the other is the president's special envoy. And he knows nothing about what he's talking about. I mean, this guy's a property billionaire. He's never been involved in this level of geopolitics. He doesn't know anything about it. More disturbing than just the bits that you played there was throughout that interview, he repeats Kremlin talking points. And so does Carlson. I mean, they're both. These are two Kremlin lovers. I mean, I'm speaking to you from the United States. The comedy shows here are full of jokes about, now let's go live to Moscow so we can speak to America's most important ally, Russia. Or let's go to Moscow now where we can speak to our best friend, Russia. That's the joke now. That's the way this administration is behaving. And he describes Putin, quote, as not a bad guy. Not a bad guy. You ought to speak to the families of those who've been murdered by Putin's thugs or stuck in the gulag by his thugs. Not a bad guy. This is a representative of supposedly the greatest democracy on earth. And I think the other thing that came through this quite clearly was that basically what they want, this is a strongman peace play. This is an attempt by the Kremlin and the White House to come to a peace arrangement that basically doesn't involve Europe at all and doesn't involve Ukraine. It's going to be an attempted peace, imposed peace on them. That's what they're trying to achieve in Riyadh this week. And I think it's very dangerous when you've got the leading representative of the president talking as if he's a Kremlin stooge. I think we've reached a sorry pass, and I am not confident about these peace talks at all, because you can call them peace talks, but I think the proper word might end up being surrender.
And I guess the problem here is that the upside is all for America and the downside is all for Ukraine and Europe, which is no way to do a deal. But Europe and Ukraine aren't in the negotiations, you say.
That's the point. That's the point. This guy couldn't even name the provinces that Russia currently occupies. And he said that they've had plebiscites there because they all want to remain Russian. But that's just sheer Kremlin propaganda. The UN has seriously questioned the plebiscites there. We don't know what the people on the Russian side of the war think about this. We didn't even have a proper referendum in Crimea. And here he is. And how does he know that Russia doesn't want to take parts of Eastern Europe? It doesn't have to be Russian tanks rolling across the border. You just bit by bit pressure them the way they've done with Belarus. Next, you go for the Baltic states. Next, you go for parts of the Balkans. How does he know that Russia doesn't want to extend its influence, its power, its control to turn them into satellite states? After all, for most of my life, Eastern Europe was a satellite state of the Soviet Union. So why does he think that couldn't happen again? What qualifies him to do so when he can't even name the provinces in Ukraine currently occupied by Russia?
Yeah, it's such a good point, Andrew. And one, we've been speaking to Bill Browder on the programme this morning.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he was absolutely fantastic and made exactly the same, points. Have we forgotten all of these things that we've very clearly seen happen with our own eyes? And I know that John Pino on Drive today will dedicate that programme to unpicking what is going on with those ceasefire talks and the direction of travel next. Andrew, I have to give you a special thank you today because I think where you are right now, it's 5:30 in the morning.
Yes, it is 5:30 in the morning. So I got up a bit later than usual to do the show.
Well, look, we appreciate it.
He doesn't need a grandmother. He doesn't need a grandmother.
We appreciate it. But I tell you what, so does one of our listeners who said, I'm driving and I've had to stop my car to say, I love Andrew Neil. I could listen to this man all day long. So hopefully it will have been worth it because it definitely was for us. Many thanks, Andrew.
Tell him the check's in the post.
Yeah.
I will do. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
That was Andrew Neil there.
If you spend a day with Andrew Neil, you listen to him all day long. I suspect he's
you know what? I think a lot of people would.
On Times Radio, firstly tonight, it's ticking into the early hours of the morning in Saudi Arabia now, isn't it? Where Ukrainian and US officials have spent the night in talks ahead of further negotiations between the US and Russia tomorrow. Meanwhile, Russian drone strikes have killed at least 3 people in Kyiv in the early hours of this morning, including at least 1 child. Kurt Volker was the United States Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations and joins us on Times Radio. Kurt, thank you for being with us. What do we understand, or what do we expect to come from this round of conversations in Saudi Arabia over the next couple of hours?
Yeah, I think it's good if people think about this in 2 categories. There is immediate ceasefire, and there is a long-term peace deal. And I think the Trump administration is determined to get an end to the fighting, an immediate ceasefire, as quickly as possible. Maybe they can do that in stages. Maybe they can say energy infrastructure first, maritime next, all air after that. Let's get to the front line later. But they want to get to a ceasefire so they stop the fighting. Russia, on the other hand, wants to bring in all of its grievances, all of its ambitions, all of the issues that it wants to talk about. They want Ukraine to be neutral. They don't want Ukraine to engage in mobilization. They don't want the U.S. to provide arms to Ukraine. They want all the territory that they've already conquered militarily and more to be given to them. So they're going to face that as the Russian response to the request for a ceasefire. They're going to have Russia demanding everything.
And so around and around we go, Kurt. No progress will be made then, basically, in the next few days. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I think you're going to see progress on the ceasefire. You're going to have a lot of Russian pushback, and hopefully you'll have an American position that is fairly clear. It says, we can talk about anything. We'll talk to the Ukrainians, we'll talk to you, but you have to stop the fighting. Okay. If that's the American position, and it's what I understand the position to be, then I think they'll get something from Russia. One more bone, one more effort at some kind of limited ceasefire. And that is what the U.S. is trying for, is to try to keep pulling them in and pulling them in.
Okay. Can we trust the United States to lead these talks?
Look, I think the U.S. can't do anything unless it also has the backing of Ukraine and Europe to help execute all of that. If we promise to do X, Y, or Z and Ukraine won't do it or Europe won't do it, then it's not a valid promise. It's an empty promise. But what's happened until now is everyone has stood in their current positions and nothing has changed for 3 years. So what the U.S. is trying to do is to engage in a process to see if we can move things along. But I don't think there's any way to conclude that process unless it takes account of the interests of Ukraine and Europe, just as Secretary of State Rubio has said.
Okay. You were in post, Kurt, and sort of on the scene, so to speak, when Donald Trump famously asked Zelensky to investigate his political rival. We don't need to relitigate that now, but it led to Trump's second impeachment, of course. It seems to have set up a sour relationship between the two. I'm curious to know from you, Kurt, as somebody who sort of watched that process or play out as in full, how much do you think that moment influences what we're witnessing right now?
I think you have it backwards there, to be honest. He had a negative impression of Ukraine before that call. Right. He thought everybody there is corrupt. He thought everybody is out to get him. And so he didn't have any trust in Ukraine. And we were trying at the time to convince him, no, Zelensky's somebody you can talk to. He had that phone call, and it was the Democrats in the United States who went after him because of that. And Zelensky said, no, there was nothing wrong. I didn't feel any pressure. And Trump has subsequently praised him for basically, standing up to say, no, I didn't feel any pressure here many, many times.
Right.
So that call and the things that followed, that was not an issue for the U.S. and Ukraine.
Fine. So it was
What
already
followed after that. Just let me finish the point here, because in this meeting in the Oval Office on February 17th, that was disastrous. And that was probably the low point itself in any Trump-Zelensky relationship, because Zelensky decided to open up the debate in public in front of the cameras with the vice president, and it just descended from there. He didn't have to do that.
okay.
And now, I'd say 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, wherever we are, things are basically back on track again. We have the U.S. and Ukraine in alignment on the military issues, on the resources issues, and talking about how do we get a ceasefire, how do we actually get a peace, which is what Ukraine actually wants.
Okay.
So I think we've gone through that cycle to this point.
Okay, Kurt Volker, thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it. United States Special Representative for Ukraine's negotiations during Donald Trump's first term, with us on Times Radio tonight.